In this video, we'll calculate the area of some different rectangles and some sort of compound shapes or composite shapes made up of different rectangles. So we'll just start with a reminder that area is a measure of the space that a figure takes up. So for example, let's see if I can scribble on this one here. If we're trying to look at the area of this square, we're looking at this space right here. And we call this 1 square unit. So we'll talk about this as being 1 square unit. It has dimensions 1 here and 1 here. So we get a total area of 1 square unit. This is 1 unit squared. So I'll just write that down. 1 unit squared. Sometimes we say 1 square unit, which is also equal to 1 square unit. Whoops. Alright, so now we can use this information to find the area of this rectangle. So the area of the rectangle here, we can actually physically count the squares, and I'll just do that by putting a little check mark in each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So really easy to do for small rectangles. Just count the number of squares if you have a grid. So the area here is equal to 6 units squared, or 6 square units. So I'm just going to write that in here, units squared. And we do that like this. So what I want to ask you right now is, how might you go about doing this same problem but without the grid? So how can we get 6 without the grid? Well, I'll get you to think about that for a second. You may want to pause the video, think for a minute. One of the things that is helpful here is to label the two side lengths. So we know that this side length here is 2 units tall by 3 units wide. So knowing that, how can we get 6 from the 2 and the 3? Well, this 2 and 3 means that we have here, let's see if I can change colors, we have 3 groups of 2. So there's a group of 2, there's a group of 2, and there's a group of 2. So we have 3, that's right here, 3 of these groups of 2. Well, 3 groups of 2 translates into a multiplication statement that says 3 times 2. So if we take the one dimension, the length or the width, and multiply it by the other dimension, we should get the area. And you can see here, 3 times 2 gives us 6 units squared. Whoops. Sorry, I was going to write the word squared, but I think I'll just put a little square in there. So if we're looking at finding the area of a rectangle and we have a grid, we can certainly count using that grid. If we don't have a grid and we only have measurements, we can take the length and multiply it by the width. So the area is equal to the length times the width. Sometimes some people call this the base times the height. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just remembering here that we're multiplying one side length by the other. So length times width will help you find the area. I'll also put here base times height in case you've seen that one before. Same idea. Alright, let's move on to this rectangle here at the bottom. You'll notice this time there is no grid, but I can give you some measurements. I can tell you that this rectangle was 3 units high and 4 units wide. So in other words, there was a grid. I hit it on you, but there was a grid that kind of went like this, 4 this way, and 3 in the other direction. I'm not going to put the whole grid on here. We're trying to kind of move away from the grid. So the question here is, how do we find the area of this? Well, we know that there is, let's see if I can do this again. There's one group of 4 here, and then another group of 4 down here, and another group of 4 here. And we know that there are 3 because we had a 3 on this side. That pen's not showing up very well on the white. We had a 3 over here, and that tells us there were 3 groups of 4. So the area in this case is just equal to the length times the width, or the base times the height. So I'm just going to write that as LW for length times width. You might even want to stick a multiplication symbol in there. So L times W. and then actually write it out. I know this is kind of tedious, but it kind of helps with the process. So I want to see your work written out like this. So length times width, which is 3 times 4. And again, you can use your calculator or just multiply those. 3 times 4 gives us 12. And don't forget the units here. This is measured in units squared because we are talking about area. So units squared. And again, you can verify. If we go back here and look, we had 4 columns. Oh, sorry. I put that in the wrong spot. That should be 3 evenly spaced out. I don't know if I can fix that. Hang on, give me a second here. We'll start over. So, we've got 4 going in this direction. My lines aren't very straight. Please forgive me. Alright, 4, they should be equally spaced. They're not quite. And then 3 going in this direction. Oh, sorry, that middle one's a bit big. So again, you get the idea here. You can count them up and verify that in fact we do have 12 square units. Alright, let's move on to the composite shapes here. Let's talk a little bit about how do we go about finding the area of these composite shapes. So in order to find the area of these composite shapes, we need to, well, we could count up all of the unit squares inside this shape. So this one has a nice grid on it, so we can actually count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe you'll see a pattern develop. And then we've got another 1, 2, 3, and 4 down here. So we had 10 on the top, 4 on the bottom. So we should get here that the area is equal to 14 square units. So again, what I want you to do is I want you to label the dimensions on your rectangles. You're not always going to have a grid, so our goal is to kind of work away from or move away from the grid. So we know, hopefully you can see 2 rectangles here, and that's important when we're talking about these composite shapes or these composite rectangles. There are lots of ways that you might see 2 rectangles. I'm going to pick one that I see. You might see a different one. I see this right here. So I see a big long rectangle at the top, this one right here. And then I see a smaller rectangle along the bottom, this one right here. So we want to find the area of each of those rectangles. And as I said earlier, we're going to start by labeling their dimensions. So the big long rectangle at the top has a dimension of 2 here. 1, 2 units in this direction. And then we'll count out this direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 5 units in that direction. That's for our big rectangle. Now let's move to the small rectangle on the bottom. Fairly easy to see. It has a measurement of 2 units in that direction and 2 units in this direction. So here we're going to say that our area is equal to, and I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to call this, I should have used different colors when I circled these rectangles. Hang on a second, let me erase this. And we'll just recreate what we need there. So I'm going to call this rectangle up here that I've circled in red, I'm going to call this A1. So this is the area of my first rectangle. So I'm going to call that A1. We'll just label its dimensions again. And then I'm going to call this other rectangle down over here, the one that's in green, I'll call that A2. So here, the area of my whole shape is equal to the area of the big shape on top plus the area of the smaller one on the bottom. So A1 plus A2. And each of these shapes is just a rectangle, so we're going to find the area of each of those shapes. So the area of A1, remember we can find the area by multiplying the length times the width. So that was 2 times 5. And you can verify that that's right. 2 times 5 is 10, and if you count the rectangles in this top rectangle, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so a total of 10. So we're looking good here. And then the second one had a length of 2 and a width of 2. So we get 2 times 2 here. And then we can go ahead and do the arithmetic. 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 2 is 4. So the area of the big one was 10, the area of the little one was 4. We add those together and get 14 units squared, just like we had up here when we counted them. So you might be wondering, why did we go through all of this work just to get the answer that we already have? And the answer to that question is that sometimes, like we'll see in the next example, you don't have a grid to count from, so you need a different strategy. And so that's why we did that. The strategy that we just used will help us out a little bit. So let's have a look here at this example down below. Again, I didn't include any grid here. I'll put some measurements on, otherwise we won't be able to do it. So the goal here is to be able to find the area without a grid. So I will tell you that the top portion here was 6 units long. This was 4. This was 2. This is 2. And I guess this is also 2 here. And so is this. And I guess this is 4. Now again, we're trying to find the area. The area is this space that the figure takes up. So we're trying to find this space in here. Somehow we need to find that. So let's try to do that. First thing we need to do is label the dimensions if they're not already labeled. Now they're labeled. And then we need to divide our shape into smaller rectangles. There are lots of ways that you can do this. I'm going to do it this way, and if you would rather do it a different way, that's okay too. I'm going to find the area of this little section down here, and this little section here. Then I'm going to find the area of this big section here. We're going to add all of those together. So again, I'm going to label my areas, label the different regions. I think that's going to make this a little bit easier. So I'm going to call this, let's call this A1. So area of my first section. We'll call this one A2, the area of my second section, and we'll call this one A3. So let's go ahead now and find the area. So the total area here, I'll just do this on the side just because I don't have room on the bottom of the page, is equal to A1 plus A2 plus A3. So we're going to add all those areas together. I'm just going to stretch this out a bit. So here's A1 down here. How do we find the area of A1? Well, it's 2 units by 2 units. Remember, we find the area by multiplying the length and the width together. So 2 times 2. I'm going to write that down. That's the area of A1. So all of this in here was A1. Then I'm going to add A2 to that. So A2 is over here. Again, it's 2 units this way by 2 units this way. Whoops. And then I need to add in area 3. A3 is this one right here. So it was 4 units by 6 units. So 4 times 6. And then you can go, oh sorry, I forgot to label this one. This is A3. Then you can go to your calculator or do some mental math, whatever you're most comfortable with. 2 times 2 is 4. Plus another 2 times 2, which is 4. Plus the 4 times 6. 4 times 6 is 24, and then we just add these all together. 4 plus 4 is 8, plus 24. 24 and 8 gives us 32. Units squared. And again, we're talking area, so we measure in units squared. So that's how we can find the area of rectangles when we have a grid and when we don't have a grid.